hidden within our Bible passage today is God's dream for the human race. A dream that all of humanity would become nonviolent. A dream that we would stop hurting each other. God's dream for the world even means that we wouldn't coerce each other or manipulate people like objects. We wouldn't engage in the soul violence of not respecting the dignity of every single human being. That dream is hidden in this passage. And within this passage is a display of a different type of power. When I say the word power, you think I mean something that gets its way, that can force people to do what it wants. But Jesus represents a different type of power altogether. A power that never uses force. It's the power to transform human hearts and minds. It's a power that is alluring and invitational, welcoming and inviting, doesn't force anyone. This is Jesus' superpower. It's the power of love, just like Huey Lewis in the News told us. Oh, if you're old enough to get that reference, thank you. We're going to work our way in this passage to God's dream for the world. But first, I want to start with a dad joke. I love dad jokes. I kind of am a dad joke. My sons are mid-20s, and I still make them groan like with whatever I say, right? So a dad joke is some simple, short joke, usually based on a silly pun, and it always creates some groaning, okay? Do you know that phrase first appeared in the 1980s, way back? And it was in an article imploring us not to put down dad jokes, because it's a way families create warm connections and memories. It's a way fathers can connect with their children. So don't put dad jokes down. That was the first time that phrase ever appeared. And then by 2018, the Ad Council of the United States did a whole major campaign about how don't put dad jokes down. It's a warmth and silliness that creates relationship within families. And then in 2019, Merriam-Webster's dictionary finally put the phrase dad joke, enshrined it in the dictionary. And I have a favorite dad joke right now. I love this one. Did you hear the inventor of throat lozenges died last week? There was no coffin at his funeral. Okay, feel it? Feel it? I love dad jokes. And I want us to sort of dad joke our way into the heart of this passage. So follow along. Verse 28. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and they went up a mountain to pray. Dad joke number 2. Do you know why mountains, you should never play hide and seek with mountains? Because they always peak, right? So here we go to the peak of this mountain where they will have a peak experience. And this first verse is Bible code. Whenever people head up a mountain in the Bible, get ready. Something really special is about to happen. This whole verse is Bible code for pay attention, because it says Jesus brought Peter, James, and John with him. That's Bible code too, because Jesus at certain key moments always pulls aside Peter, James, and John. It's like they're this inner circle of disciples for the most special moments. When Jairus' daughter had died, and the family was in deep mourning. This little child died, and Jesus came into the house and brought Peter, James, and John up to the girl's room and brought her back to life. And when Jesus headed to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he was wrestling with, could he make a sacrifice of this level? Could he do it? He brought Peter, James, and John into the garden with him. And here, he's pulling aside Peter, James, and John, so pay attention. Something big is about to happen. And while he was praying, next verse, the appearance of his face changed, was transfigured, and his clothes became like a flash of lightning, dazzling white. His face was changed. Dad joke number 3, super old joke. A horse walks into a bar, and the bartender says, "What's with the long face?" I love that because it's so sweet. That's a bartender that cares. Well, this isn't a long face. This face is shining and radiating. For all over the world, there's been this sort of archetype that especially holy persons, holy and pure persons, literally radiate or glow, and Jesus in his holiness is he's luminous. I mean, we talk about luminaries, but this is something beyond that. He's shining with that divinity. Next verse. Suddenly they saw 2 men, Moses and Elijah, talking to Jesus. They all appeared in glory, speaking of the exodus he would fulfill in Jerusalem. Okay, 4th dad joke. I didn't know Moses was so technologically advanced. He had the first tablet connected to the cloud. Okay, right now, we have dad joked our way to the very center of this passage, and this is God's dream for us. Watch what's happening. It's also kind of Bible code. Moses and Elijah meet with Jesus, and they talk about the crucifixion. That's the exodus he will fulfill. That's the departure he will accomplish in Jerusalem. They're talking about this loving sacrifice that Jesus will be made. But you have to remember, Moses and Elijah were the 2 great prophets, but they felt they had to fulfill their mission by killing people. I don't know if you remember Moses, when he brought the people through the Red Sea, the waters came down on all of Pharaoh's army, and Moses became a military leader that led the Hebrews against the Amalekites and killed thousands. You see, they thought violence could fulfill purposes. They thought violence could fix problems, and that you could use violence if you had an enterprise or agenda. And Elijah, do you remember when he's fighting the prophets of Baal, he wipes them out. I mean, it's like a massacre. But Jesus, he's the great one that won't use violence ever. Ever. The means would never justify the ends. Ever, if you're going to hurt people. Jesus is talking about how he won't even self-defend. If the Romans are going to arrest him, if the Romans are going to execute him, he won't even self-defend. You know he could. He has miraculous powers. If you can raise people from the dead, you can make people dead. He could have obliterated anybody he needed to. But he would never use violence, ever. Right in this little Bible code of Moses and Elijah and Jesus talking about the crucifixion, right at that moment, God's dream for us is being expressed. We still think violence solves problems. We still try to exert force over one another. Jesus is a different way. Jesus is God's dream for the world. Next verse. Now Peter and his companions were asleep. Talk about a bad time to go to sleep. But as they awake, they see the glory and Moses and Elijah with Jesus. Peter fell asleep. In 1965, June of that year, Dr. Martin Luther King was giving a commencement address at Oberlin College in Ohio. And his address was titled, "On Staying Awake During the Revolution." And he told the students a story about Rip Van Winkle. Do you remember Rip Van Winkle? He told them a story about how Rip Van Winkle went up the mountain and fell asleep, but fell asleep for 20 years, if you remember. What you might not remember is when Rip Van Winkle was going up that mountain, he saw a little sign with the picture of King George III. He went up and fell asleep, came back down the mountain, and that sign had changed. It was a picture of George Washington. He slept through the American Revolution. He slept through the revolution of moving from a king to a president. And Dr. Martin Luther King told the student body that day, don't sleep through a revolution. And he was describing that the civil rights movement was a revolution of the human spirit where everyone's going to be treated equally. Don't fall asleep. Don't. And he told them it's not only the civil rights. He told them that the only way we can move forward is through nonviolence. That day in June of 1965 at Oberlin, he was telling them, don't sleep through the revolution that must take place. We have to move towards nonviolence. Violence will never solve our problems. Peter slept through a spiritual evolution. Now, thankfully, if you remember the Bible story, the resurrected Jesus will bring him up into that vision, but he missed it right here. Next verse. Just as they were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, Master, well, it's so good we're here. Let us make 3 tents. 3 tents, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for you. He didn't know what he was saying. So Peter himself is like a dad joke, right? I mean, he suddenly get intense trying to get them in tents, right? He's got Moses and Elijah who are past tense, and he's trying to put them in the present tense, right? He's a dad joke. And just like a dad falls asleep when he sits down on the couch, Peter just fell asleep. So now he's awake, though, and he's trying to put them in tents. Notice here that Peter is making one key mistake. These are spiritual beings. They don't need to camp out. They don't need a tent. These are spiritual beings. He's taking something that is spiritual and being overly literal. Do you see that? We make this mistake with religion all the time. Religion is about spiritual truths, but we take things too literally. And sometimes a rigorous Christian will tell me that I take the Bible literally. And I go, oh, good. But are you also making your way to spiritual meanings? Because do you remember in the ancient world, there were different levels of Bible interpretation. The literal level is the first level, but you've got to go deeper. In the ancient world, you had to go to its moral meanings, to its symbolic meanings, and then lastly to the anagogical meanings or the spiritual meaning. What does it mean for you and for our world? You had to progress from the literal to the spiritual, but we still make this mistake. Sometimes you hear religion talking in our creeds and our catechisms, and you just take it literally and forget to find its spiritual meaning. So don't pull a Peter. Always move towards the spiritual meaning. Like take our Nicene Creed. And when it says that Jesus ascended to the right hand of the Father, well, if you just take it literally, don't think of him just sitting in a chair next to the throne by God. No, move to the spiritual meaning that Jesus is our transcendent divine one. You always have to move towards spiritual meanings. And then a cloud came and overshadowed them. They were terrified. And then a voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my Son, my beloved. Listen to him." So this is a fun moment of divine reiteration. Remember, that's essentially the same thing God said at the baptism of Jesus. The voice coming from the heavens as Jesus came out of the waters of the Jordan saying, "This is my child, my beloved. With thee I'm well pleased." And so God reiterates that, "This is my Son, my beloved." And adds, "Listen to him." So are you listening to him? Do you remember what he said? Listen to him. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, offer the other. Has there ever been a more nonviolent sentence ever spoken? He then says in the next sentence, don't resist evil. Don't meet evil with violence. It can only be transformed by love. Are you listening to him? This nonviolent dream for the world? He said, love your enemies. Has there ever been a more gentle sentence ever? Love your enemies? He's trying to live out a dream. I like that sound. Because it's a baby. It's Troy. Oh, don't leave. I like that sound. And so, my friends, let me end with one more dad joke. One more dad joke. Did you hear? There was a kidnapping at Lincoln High. Don't worry, he woke up. Okay. So, my friends, do not nap during a spiritual evolution. Do not nap. God and Jesus are giving us these hints of the true dream. Don't fall asleep. Become part of that movement. Gentleness, the dignity of every person honored, the suffering held. Amen.